SABC News presentation.
Welcome to Interface. My name is Samachele. The ANC is holding its 54th National General Council next weekend. The meeting is held every 5 years to analyze and assess progress in implementing the governing party's policies. The 53rd NGC, held in 2012, resolved to focus on radical socio-economic transformation in order to rigorously address poverty, inequality and unemployment. The ANC says much has been achieved since the 2012 National General Council. But what's your view? You can give us your comments as per usual on our FB page. Just note that the FB page now is at Interface on SABC and on Twitter at Samachele or at Interface on SABC. So we are now in discussion with the ANC Deputy Secretary General, Ms. Jessie Duarte, and we will be asking her a lot about what is going to come out of the NGC. Welcome and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
So I spoke a little bit in the intro about the 2012 focus areas. Let's just run through some of them. You wanted to create more jobs and boost the economy. You wanted rural development. You wanted education to be sorted out, health, and fighting crime and corruption. Now when we review 5 years later or a couple of years later, let's take economic growth. The economy is struggling at the moment. Well, and also we're not seeing much by way of job creation.
Well, firstly, the economy would struggle because of the international downturn. And if one looks at the first 19 years of our existence as a government, it was an average of 3.5%, which was much higher even than the US growth rate. However, we struggle with manufacturing and the manufacturing industry. If you recall, in 2012, we said that we would wish to see the private sector who get any kind of work from government having a 75% of local content in anything that they produce. Well, the reality is that there's a sluggish response to that by the private sector. So where jobs are being created is in the public sector, and government cannot be the only employer. That creates its own set of negative circumstances. So we're clear that we needed to move very solidly towards creating local economies and pushing our direct financial institutions that are related to government to make more money available to people who want to open local businesses. That is a stimulant for the economy. That's happening, but not enough.
But in terms of the private sector participation that you were talking about, this is something that you knew even back in 2012, that the private sector was not coming to the party. What are you going to discuss at this particular NGC that's going to take that discussion forward?
More importantly is what we've done before the NGC is to engage the private sector very upfront. Over the last couple of months, we've had several discussions with captains of the people that call themselves the captains of industry, with agriculture. Just yesterday, we had 150 women in a room who were women in various business entities to discuss. The one question we have to discuss with each other is how many jobs can you create in the private sector now and going forward?
But what kind of commitments did you get from them then?
We get vague commitment. I think the private sector is also very much attuned to what people call the mood in the country. And they appear not to look so much at the bottom line, except in let's not lose any profits. So they're staying on a profit trajectory, even if it is a profit margin of 2%. And we're saying that's not good enough. Even the private sector has to say that their profit margins must exceed 2%, and we must be a 5% economy, a growth economy. So look above that. They raise issues with us, and we will raise those issues in the NGC. They talk about red tape. They talk about the ineffectiveness of the civil service to assist them. They complain about the fact that even if you do produce for government, it takes a long time to get paid. So we're saying, look, we can fix that, but what are you willing to bring to the table in terms of expanding your economic development programs here and in SADC and on the African continent? Because our growth trajectory as a country will depend largely, not so much on how much we have a partnership with China, India or Brazil, but how much we will have a partnership with other African countries and intra-African trade. And that is one of our negative points.
What are you as the ruling party going to do about this? Because you've already had the engagement, you've talked about it at the NGC. Now you don't want to have yet another discussion about the same thing. What kind of concrete plans and commitments are you looking to get out of this?
Well, we as the ruling party can influence the government to cut some of the red tape, definitely, that they've raised with us. Some of the things they've said are real. For example, the other thing we can do is our cost of transport in this country is horrendously high. And that's because not everybody is using rail and they're using the roads. Road transportation is expensive. So what is our responsibility? Is to ensure that the rail is effective, efficient, and already that's underway. I'm sure you know that there's a great deal of work being done to improve the rail network. Push the private sector along that line so that costs for them do come down. But primarily we will also take the high end of the lamentation, which is getting the civil service to work more effectively. That we will do. Thirdly is, let's look at local government. The best way to make our economy and to stimulate it is to get local government working like a machine that is well oiled, in fact.
And that's quite a challenge.
And the challenge there is that out of 256 local municipalities, most work well. 26, which are quite important, are difficult municipalities where they don't have a proper income base. And yet they are linked very closely to an industrial area, or they are linked very closely to a big city. So one of the things right now is to look at non-viable municipalities, redemarcate, which has already been begun.
That's causing quite a headache and a lot of strife amongst the councillors.
People don't like that because, firstly, councillors feel threatened and they feel that they're going to lose jobs, but that's not the reality. You know, it just means a bigger municipality, well run, with the council seats being shaped to include people, not to exclude. And I think what we're trying to do at this NGC is to talk through this personalization of the state and a state-owned job as my job forever. I'm a councillor and I must be there not for 5 years, but for 30 years. And the state cannot guarantee that.
All right, we have to take a short break and we are back after this. But remember, if you would like to take part in the conversation, you can do so via our social media pages. Do stay with us. And we're in conversation with the Deputy Secretary General of the African National Congress, Jesse Duarte, and we're talking about the upcoming NGC, the 54th NGC of the ANC. And we've spoken a bit about the economy, Jesse, but if we look at one of your major statements in the 2012 document, it was that you wanted to look at radical economic growth, and I'm assuming that's still the theme, even going into this NGC.
Absolutely.
So between the last one and now, we've seen the emergence of the EFF talking about just that and pushing that line of being more radical, and they're saying you are failing to do that. How are you going to address that?
Well, I'm not going to respond to the EFF. I prefer not to talk about other organizations. We have our own program and plan. The reality is that we believe that there is no way we can be transformational without changing some of the old ideas that have been settled on the ground. We can no longer have a mining industry that doesn't think about beneficiating locally. We cannot have a mining industry owned by 4 people in South Africa. That particular perspective has to be spread. We've developed a state-owned mining company. That might well be the way to go for the long future. We cannot have a mining industry that looks at pricing from the perspective of how it sells the commodities only. For example, coal. The coal is mined here. We use 70% of our energy base is coal reliant, and some of the mining companies are selling the coal to Eskom at the price that they sell it to externally, and that's not good enough for us. Lastly is this concept of settling your economy in various directions. We have to create local economies. We must. That's why the heightened and 1 trillion rands expenditure on infrastructure, particularly aimed at rural areas, so that you can move the economy out of where it's been
the urban areas.
It's been bottlenecked. So you have a bottleneck here in Gauteng, you have a bottleneck in PE, and so on and so forth. We've got to spread the economy down.
I understand that you don't want to talk particularly about the EFF, but I think it's important that you address the criticism that is dominating the public discourse that they came with, and that is that you are just not radical enough to turn the economy around.
I'm not going to address the EFF. The EFF is not the primary reason why we're having an NGC.
Understood.
The primary reason why we're having an NGC is to look at whether we have been able to deal with things in 2.5 years. 2.5 years is 24 months plus another 8 months have gone by. So that's about 30 months, right? That's what we're looking at.
So you would say you are radical, is the question I'm asking.
We think we're moving quite fast in terms of turning around the mindset in this country.
Fair enough. The education system in the country has also come under fierce criticism. Yes. And we've also seen the Department of Education being at odds with the unions. Very recently we spoke to both sides about the ANAs, and it's just not looking pretty. What is the ruling party's view on that? Let's
look at all the issues collectively. Over 1 million young South Africans have gone through the higher education and tertiary level since 1994. So our country does have a skills base that we can leverage now. We've got to build on that, and we've got to remember what's been done as well. 3 universities in South Africa we deem not to have transformed enough. UCT, Stellenbosch, and to some extent an atmosphere around Wits University as well. The issue here is that the students are not incorrect when they talk about black lecturers not being given the opportunities that other lecturers have. The students are quite right when they say that there are many black academics in this country, and yet universities go and source a black lecturer from Ghana instead of using a South African academic that has gone through the very universities that are fighting back. The students are not wrong to talk about the fact that they don't have enough resources within the university to make sure that their studies are smooth. What we will struggle with for a while is to double the NSFAS 18 billion to double that amount, which is what some students in some universities are talking about, and that's free, totally free tertiary level education. That will mean taking something away somewhere else. And where that somewhere else will be in a stretched budget that we already have is a question that we're putting on the table. It cannot be that we simply make emotional decisions. We've got to make them quite realistically as well. But on the other hand, moving forward the education of our youth is a key priority for the ANC.
The 3 universities that you've singled out, they've been dominating the news headlines recently with all of the uprisings by the students. What is the policy position, let me say, that the NGC is possibly going to be pushing for to try and deal with the lack of transformation that you're talking about?
Well, we're very clear that if there is, universities have to source lecturers locally before they look internationally. Firstly, we cannot argue that there are no South Africans with the, after 20 years, with the requisite experience and knowledge base to teach our children.
Universities will argue that you're making them less competitive because no university around the world does that. They'll say, you know, that's the nature of higher education. You source your talent from everywhere.
I wonder if that's really the truth. You know, in the USA, the universities are very competitive, but they have a good mix of local and international lecturers, you know, visiting lecturers come in. What we do here is we simply ignore South Africans with the requisite qualifications. That's our argument, is we're saying to Stellenbosch, look, the fact that you teach in Afrikaans, key subjects, doesn't suggest that you've recognized that the majority of the students who are going to come to your university have no relationship to Afrikaans whatsoever. And they would like to be taught in other languages. The fact that we have no single woman vice-chancellor in this country is a problem that we must face as South Africans. Are we saying that there's no woman academic in this country that is worthy of being a vice-chancellor? Or are we saying that the enclaves or the cabals that have manifested on universities should forever remain in place and not move forward?
I'm going to ask you
we'll
to hold that thought. Yes, that's a very important one. And as usual, we're going to take another short break, but do keep your thoughts coming, and we will make sure that we try and get to as many of them as we can. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We are finalizing our conversation with Jesse Duarte, who is with the ANC, talking about the 54th NGC. Now, there's a whole lot of other issues that you plan to touch on at the NGC, and we obviously won't have enough time to address all of them. But I do want us to touch on corruption. We saw the march recently, the anti-corruption march, and the criticism for the ANC was, you're not participating. Yes, we had Zizi Kodwa there saying a few words, but if you had come in your numbers to say, yes, we are also against corruption, it would have made a strong statement. Your response?
But we are against corruption. And whether we march with other people or not doesn't take that away from us, you know. What we're very pleased about is the numbers of civil society organizations that are now speaking out in a very decisive voice. And that adds to the voice and the action that we're taking. I'll give you an example. Let's say there's a very corrupt councillor in a local municipality, or a corrupt civil servant in a local municipality or anywhere else. The difficulty we sometimes have is that when we tackle that person, it's the community that will protest against us removing such a person.
Oh.
Right? So those are the facts that we must put on the table. So it's for us, it's a wonderful thing that civil society is saying, we are with you on this anti-corruption.
But why didn't you join in your numbers as the
Well,
ANC?
frankly speaking, invitations were extended to people very specifically, and we decided to send Zizi Kodwa because we had not been invited, and we believe that we had not been invited because the organizers thought that this was a faction of a particular kind that was coming together. As far as we're concerned, you can't factionalize the fight against corruption. It's something we all have to be involved in, and we're happy that civil societies come on board.
And the point is, it's not fighting government corruption only, but
fighting
also
total.
all of it across the spectrum, including the private sector. Our bread and milk prices and
I like
everything.
what Archbishop Mahoba said. He says there's a corrupted person and a corruptee, which equals corruption. And I think that equation is quite true. What we tend to do is we look at one side of the equation. We don't look at the fact that people up the chain are corrupting young people, particularly young civil servants, who go into the system, don't earn a great deal of money, are corrupted by people in the supply chain totally. And so that's what we're uncovering, and that's what we're dealing with. There wouldn't have been the change in Limpopo, for instance, by the ANC if we weren't firm about corruption. And yet, the people who fought against us to stop that looting was the very people from the EFF.
So what is the NGC going to do to take the conversation forward on corruption?
We're very clear. We've given our Integrity Commission more power. We're saying the Integrity Commission now will not have to wait for anyone to tell them how a person must be dealt with. They will make that decision,
Okay.
and will be endorsed by the NEC. We're also saying that we are fearlessly going to go ahead with dealing with people who are awaiting trial for corruption. Although we've up to now been saying to people, if you've been accused of corruption, use your conscience to excuse yourself from the ANC. Only one person, Andile from the Youth League, ever did that. Others didn't. You know, when he was accused of misusing 2 million rand or something else. So now we're saying, no. Listen, it can't be right that you're accused and you remain in the job where you are currently located. You're going to have to say, I will excuse myself while I'm sorting out this problem. And later on, you may be able to come back.
Okay. Now, the last round of voting,
Yes.
we saw a slip in the ANC's dominance, particularly in the Gauteng province. That was an issue for a while. NGC, what plans do you have to try and make sure you regain some of that ground?
Right. We've already looked at our statistics going forward, and Gauteng has gained ground again, which is excellent. But we are saying, look, there's no point in the community only seeing us when there's an election. What we are examining is how often councillors, MPs and MPLs have been in touch with the connected and stayed connected to the community. One of the things that softens a vote is when people feel they're not being heard.
Yeah.
And they see the dust at the back of a Mercedes ML or a BMW. And one of the things we've put on the table as the ANC in this booklet is in the organizing and development of our organization is that, look, we're not going to tolerate people who sit around and attend meetings as if that is the only thing that they have to do for the ANC. If you want to be an ANC councillor or an MP or an MPL, you're going to have to be known by everyone who lives in your constituency. If you are not known, you're simply wasting the time of the ANC. So it's going to be tough, and that means that the review process of councillors is not going to make us very popular. And we're likely to see a lot of people who haven't been working very hard going to the EFF. That's been the trend in the last couple of weeks. Don't work hard enough, you go and join the EFF. We're happy with that. They can have them.
Shots fired. Well, lastly, just before we let you go, Mam Jessie, the issue of the service delivery protests is a big one. Very quickly, what is your proposed solution? 23
municipalities have had recurring service delivery protests over the last 18 months. The reasons for those have been various. One has been water supply, where people have settled in informal settlements where water supply other than by a truck is impossible. Others have been where people have wanted to remove a councillor and replace the councillor with another person. Others have been straightforwardly around allegations of corruption, where there have been forensic reports that haven't been adequately dealt with by the council itself. On that category, we've acted already, where we've said, look, we're putting the forensic reports have to be tabled and the actions have to be taken that are recommended in those forensic reports. So you've seen a number of MMs and senior civil servants in local government losing their jobs in some of the municipalities. We are ready to move, frankly speaking. We're also saying that we must appeal to the community that when we move, don't have another faction within the community stopping that.
Right.
Allow honest, real action that you've pointed out to us to be taken.
All right, we're going to have to leave it on that note. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. There's so much more to talk about, but I'm sure we'll pick up the discussion at a later stage, and all the best with your NGC.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mam Jessie Duarte, and thank you for watching. And as usual, let's continue the conversation on social media. Goodbye.